So good evening and welcome. Welcome to all of you with us tonight. It's lovely to have you. Tonight we're talking about healing in times of crisis. And for those of us in the north part of New Zealand, in the earlier part of January, February, we really were hit hard and there was a lot of crisis for us. And I've always thought, as I was growing up, New Zealand's one of those little places where nothing ever happens. All the big scary stuff happens overseas, and we are never at the center of the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the floods. But hey, the last 10 years have taught us exactly the opposite. We're just as prone to these as anybody else. And as a result of this, we've suffered. We've suffered in different parts of this nation at different times over the last 10 years in many different ways. And I'm just going to share my screen now. It's got a wee slideshow coming up. So yeah, the title for tonight is Healing in Times of Crisis. And we, as parents, are needing to do a lot of healing through all the crises that we're being confronted with at the moment, particularly since the COVID pandemic most recently. And many of us also are experiencing personal crises of our own grief, loss, chaotic home environments, financial struggles. These are all things that we're facing in our own homes at different times. And I was presenting a lot on anxiety shortly before COVID pandemic hit. And there was a real talk at the time of an anxiety epidemic breaking out in the world, all over the place. The numbers were so high. And then COVID hit, and that became, it's just escalated since then. The research is through the roof of the amount of anxiety that our kids are facing. So when we're hit with crises like this, what do we do? How do we get our way out of it? How do we, when we're ourselves in suffering, grief and loss, how do we get out of it? And then how do we help our children out of it? So we're going to watch a presentation, as you know, shortly, but I'm going to spend 5 to 10 minutes just giving you a bit of context here about where the talk tonight sits in Neufeld theory. So it sits within the theory of resilience. And what is resilience? It's the capacity to return to optimal functioning or to thrive under duress. We often think, what's normal? Are all the other kids, quite anxious too? What's happening in society? Or we want my kid to be normal. But what Dr. Neufeld talks about is, what is optimal? What is optimal? Where do we want our kids to be? And particularly in times of stress. So how do I know that my kid is all right? This is something we need to ask ourselves. And how do I know I am all right? Because I'm putting this presentation for both of us. We as parents need to find our resilience before we can share it with our kids. And I've got a very easy little test for you here. The litmus test, how do I know my kids functioning optimally, or are they in crisis? Have they somehow got stuck in crisis mode? And there's 3 simple things to look at here. Ask yourself, is my child full of play? Are they full of rest? And are they full of feeling? Because these 3 things are the things that indicate optimal emotional functioning. They might not be what you're expecting to see, but they are just such a lovely, simple way of cutting straight through it. Think about your child. Think, am I seeing these 3 things? So I'm going to start by talking about being full of play. Do you see play in your kid? Do you see play in yourself? Do you laugh spontaneously at times? Is there a bit of mischief, a bit of lighthearted fun in the way that you approach others, or your work, or your family? Has play gone missing? If play's gone missing, ask yourself, oh, what's going on here? You should be seeing creativity coming forth. Play is actually a form of rest. We can really be at rest when we're playing, but our whole system is activated. So it's like the brain has come into rest when we're playing, but we're not actually sleeping. We can be really active. So it emerges naturally, play, when we get enough rest And true play is the leading edge of child development. We develop when we play. True play is healing, and it's very therapeutic in its nature. Playfulness is also the key to processing big emotions. There's so much we could say about this, but we've done other presentations on play that you're welcome to look up on our website. Playfulness is something that is lacking when a kid is in crisis. Playfulness is lacking when we are in crisis. So take a look at yourself or at your child or your family and say, where's the play? If that's missing, might be time to have a think. Are we in a bit of trouble? Rest is the next thing to ask yourself. Are we getting enough rest? Is my child coming to rest? Are they finding deep physical rest? Are they sleeping deeply through the night? Are they waking? Are they struggling to ever feel restful? And importantly, are they finding deep psychological rest? Now, the well-attached child will find rest very easily and without any problems. They'll just collapse into it. Are they cuddling up to you? Are they curling up in your lap? Are they leaning on you physically? This kind of a rest is the sort of a rest that we want to see in a child who's functioning optimally. You'll see a lot of agitation in a child who's not falling into rest quickly enough. The next thing to think about is my child, or am I full of feeling? So for optimal functioning, we need to feel all sorts of feelings. They should come up and they should rise up. They should be really, should come to the surface and we should feel them. So do we feel hurt when we're wounded? Tired when we're needing rest? Do we feel sorry when bad things happen? Hopeful when we're looking forward to something? Do we feel alarmed when facing separation? Do we feel empty and lonely when we're apart from someone we love? Do we feel caring feelings when we're attached to someone? Do we feel shy when we're not attached? Do we feel rejected when we're not invited by others? Frustrated when something we wanted is thwarted? Do we feel angry when facing injustice? Or do we feel conflicted when mixed emotions exist? All of these things should be part of our lived experience every day. If you're not seeing a lot of feelings in your child, you need to ask yourself, why is that? And we need to be able to invite all of our children's feelings. And sometimes we're really happy with our children's positive or acceptable feelings when they're cuddly, happy, excited, caring, hopeful, calm, cooperative. We're like, yes, that's all great. And we're happy about those. But when the negative feelings come in, when they're enraged, oppositional, irate, sad, deflated, disappointed, hateful, upset, critical, resistant, we're not often so welcoming of those emotions. That's something to keep in mind. Emotional health is noisy. Now, you might think, oh, something's really wrong with my child. There's tears, there's dramas, there's tantrums. This is a problem. But I want to reassure you that emotional health, if you're seeing a lot of it, is a sign of good health rather than bad health. When things are not going so well, feelings go missing. And feelings go missing in a time of crisis. So what happens when a crisis hits? What happens is the primal emotion that we would call alarm. Alarm kicks in and we go into fight, flight, we go into survival instincts. And those are there for a very good reason. They're to keep us safe in a crisis. At the time of a crisis, for example, in a flood, we're not thinking about the photo albums. We're just thinking about keeping safe, getting the family out to higher ground. Feelings are a luxury. They are shut down by the brain in a time of crisis because that is not the thing we can afford to think about. Afterwards, when we return to the house and we find all the photos have been destroyed, I had a friend talk about this recently, just the deep tears and sorrow of losing thousands of photos, years and years of photos, and she knew she would never get them back again. And when we're confronted with our loss and the alarm has dropped, the emotions return, the tears should start to flow. However, for some kids and for some of us, they don't flow. We remain stuck in the alarmed place. And when the feelings shut down, that's when we need to go, okay, something has happened because of this crisis that has got me stuck. You see, we human beings are designed to be able to face enormous loss, traumatic events, troubling circumstances. We're actually hardwired with the tools to recover from very difficult circumstances, so long as these don't get stuck. The three things: play, feelings, rest. Are they still functioning, or did they get stuck? Has something shut them down? Once they get stuck, that's when we don't have the resilience to bounce back. This drawing here is to indicate a brick wall around the heart. The emotions shut down, the heart and the alarmed child underneath it saying, I can't face this, it's too much, I can't face this. The brick wall goes up, this layer of defense, which is triggered in time of crisis. And it's really helping the child not to feel the overwhelming feelings. But when it gets stuck, the other feelings, and I've indicated that by the love hearts here, the warmth can't get in. The heart, the brain has blocked on quite a deep level all the feelings. And now that alarmed child who really needs the cuddles, needs the warmth, needs the connection, can't feel it because they're stuck in alarm. So we need our feelings to be able to foster resilience. How do we foster a return to good feelings? The feelings that move us to bounce back, there are three key feelings: feeling sad, feeling safe, and feeling strong. So when a child feels safe, this is a place that's born of connection. And I've chosen the picture of a mum reading a story at bedtime because, and dads, it can equally be a dad, obviously, too. That sense of connection, that sense of closeness that the child feels when the world is a safe place. When it feels safe, it feels okay to feel again. The heart that's defended, when it feels safe enough, the defenses melt, and these caring feelings can get in and do the job they need to do with that alarmed child. So the defenses need to melt to find that. And first of all, we need safety for that to happen. Next, we need to be able to feel sad. If we cannot feel sad, we cannot melt, we cannot shift out of that stuck place. And we will only cry those deep releasing tears in the arms of the ones who love us and the ones we feel safe with. So we as adults need to find our own safe place and our own safe people to let it all out with too, so that once that's been shifted, we can be there for our tamariki as well. When we're with our children in a time of sadness, we go on a bit of a journey. We allow them to let down their defenses, let everything down and let it all out and wallow about in what Dr Neufeld calls the abyss at the bottom of the cliff, and just really, really feel the depth of those emotions. And only then, when we allow ourselves to feel them, do we bounce back. This is going to get covered in the presentation more. So only when we find our tears can we start to feel strong again. And that's what sits on the other side of the tears. Denise and Marla are going to present soon on tears and cultural scripting around tears, and how tears are the key to unlocking resilience. I just wanted you to have that matrix in your mind first: feeling safe, feeling sad, so that you can feel strong, and the three: play, rest, and feelings. So that's where this sits within Neufeld theory, this presentation tonight. Have we had any questions come up? Please feel free to put questions in the chat as you listen, and we will address these towards the end of the presentation. Has anything come up, Ruth?
No questions so far, just the introductions.
Lovely. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you faculty Denise and Marla, who are our colleagues over in Canada. And take a cup of coffee, sit back, relax. This is a beautiful presentation. We've got about 35 minutes of presentation here from these two.
Good morning, Hot Squile, Tanuyap, Denise Quinn Sna, Tana, Chenkla, Huamulchison, Hohomeo. I just introduced myself in my Squamish language. I'd like to just acknowledge that today I am speaking to you from my home in the village of Huamulchison, which is on the coast of British Columbia. It's a beautiful sunny spring day here. And as I look to the north, the beautiful North Shore Mountains are there. And then to the west is the Capilano River. And behind me to the south is the Burrard Inlet and the ocean. I'm delighted to be here to speak to you today about Indigenous ways of healing and to be doing this with my colleague and good friend, Marla, who will introduce herself in a moment. I would just like to welcome everybody to this session. We're very excited to share some of the work we've been doing in communities throughout not only British Columbia, but other parts of Canada in regards to healing and this sort of, I guess, this beautiful synthesis that we're witnessing of the diversity of local place-based traditions that we see throughout the country, sort of synthesizing with some of the latest science around healing, neuroscience, attachment theory, developmental psychology, and certainly Dr. Neufeld has given us this beautiful way, this beautiful paradigm with which to make sense of how traditional place-based cultures, peoples who've lived in synchrony with nature, protected by cultures that have evolved over time, how culture actually provides and protects what is necessary, essentially, for not only healing to unfold, but for whole person development to unfold. And one of the things Marla and I kind of giggle about is that, and we like to say this, it feels like a violation to talk about things that were never meant to be spoken of. And so we both, I know, we both feel a great sense of inner conflict around having to speak to something that was just meant to be. And I know that I've heard elders say that there's certain things that aren't meant to be spoken of. And for me, things weren't meant to be spoken of because it's almost like the more we speak about it and the more explicit we make it, it loses some of its power or its magic. But because of the impacts of colonization on place-based cultures and Indigenous peoples of Canada, we must speak about these things as a way to contribute to cultural resurgence that's happening as the best medicine for our families, for our communities. So I'm going to pause there. I'm on faculty with the Neufeld Institute. I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University, and I've had a private practice for many years, but I'm going to pass the baton over to Marla so she has a chance to introduce herself before we get into the content that we want to share with you today.
Merci. Thank you, Denise. Tanze, Anine, Marla, Nasika-san. My name is Marla, and I want to acknowledge that I am joining you where I have the privilege and pleasure of living and working bordering Treaty 2 and Treaty 5 territories in Manitoba. So I'm located right between the beautiful shores of Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba. And I'm just delighted to be sharing this space with Denise and want to sort of also acknowledge the discomfort of not having the context in which we normally do our work. So what we would normally do is invite you all to join us on screen, and we would enter into even virtual circle is much more context for us to begin a relationship in which to share our work together. But this platform doesn't really allow for that. So this will suffice. And I agree with Denise that these things around the most sacred parts of us, around relationships, are generally not meant to be spoken about. So there is a lot of inner dissonance and discomfort around that. But yes, because there's been incredible disruption, we need to find our way back to this, and we need to speak about it now. But yeah, relationship is just meant to be entered into and invited. So with that, I would say, I hope that those of you who are joining us today and listening to the session are as comfortable as you can be, that you have a comfortable place and a comfortable space, that you have a warm or cold beverage, that you've had your snacks or that you're enjoying them now. And we're just so pleased to be speaking to you today, though we wish it was with you in circle.
I'm glad you said that, Marla, because it's true. The context that we work within is always within circle, and with our dear elders and our knowledge carriers, starting us off with good words in a good way, and just creating the container in which people can find rest. And that really has been the role that culture has played for us since time really immemorial, which means time out of memory, beyond our memories from what we can remember. Indigenous peoples in the long ago, I doubt, sat around the fire contemplating how to heal, or contemplating relationships. In fact, it would have been more just a part of a life way that had evolved over time, and there was just a certain way that things were done. And the beautiful part about all of this dialogue we're in, I see this as kind of a discourse, a discussion that we're having today, is that part of the beauty of Indigenous worldviews is that the imagination was always used to preserve a life way, to preserve balance, to preserve harmony, to preserve relationships with the human and more than human. And so that life way just took care of people.
There was rest in all of those places where we could melt into, and those rituals and customs and ways of being, of we knew, what to do in our daily rituals, and we felt taken care of within that context.
Yes, which is so important. Good morning, Hot Squile, Tanuyap, Denise Quinn Sna, Tana, Chenkla, Homulchison, Hohomeo. I just introduced myself in my Squamish language. I'd like to just acknowledge that today I am speaking to you from my home in the village of Homulchison, which is on the coast of British Columbia. It's a beautiful sunny spring day here. And as I look to the north, the beautiful North Shore Mountains are there, and then to the west is the Capilano River, and behind me to the south is the Burrard Inlet and the ocean. So, where do we start with this conversation? What's the story? This is a conference about resilience. And we know from what we've learned from Dr. Neufeld and what the science tells us is that every mammal, every human has this deep biological capacity to be transformed, to heal, to recover, to grow, no matter what happens. There is a little bit of controversy about the term resilience in the Indigenous population that I've heard lately around the use of the word, and that the word in some circles has kind of been used as, look at how resilient you are. Isn't it great that you went through all those things and it made you so resilient? And that's not how we're using the word, and that's certainly not how Dr. Neufeld uses this word. Resilience, when we use the word resilience, we are really talking about healing. We're talking about these deep biological inner processes that, when the right conditions are there, healing unfolds spontaneously, and we can recover. No matter what our story is, no matter what has come before, no matter what has happened to us. And I think that is a very hopeful message in a world where we often talk about things like complex trauma and make it sound as if it's so complicated and it's so deterministic that if so many things happen to you, then you're going to have these problems for the rest of your life, and you're never going to be able to do this or to do that. That is simply not true. And this is what the science tells us, that when the conditions are right, and we'll talk about what those conditions are, that we have this beautiful system that nature has given us for helping us recover and heal.
Well, I contrast that, Denise, to sort of this prevalent mental health model of much of our suffering becomes pathologized, which concerns me so deeply because we can get this sense that there's something fundamentally wrong inside of us when we're suffering.
Yeah.
But yet we suffered for thousands of years. You know, to be human is to suffer. And how did we flourish nonetheless? There was ways of taking care of this.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that in and reminded me of that, you know, this idea that our tragedies do not have to become our traumas, and that indeed, since time immemorial, we have navigated natural disasters, losses, death, disappointment, destruction, war. These things have always been with us. But what is different today is that we don't have cultures that are able to script processes in which we would be able to recover. And we've moved to this, as you said, this way of pathologizing the human condition and suffering. When we look to indigenous wisdom traditions, we can see an acknowledgement pretty clearly, and I've been able to see that in my research, is that there's this acknowledgement that the path of becoming whole is fraught with suffering. It is a very difficult path with many obstacles, and that one's culture is intended to support one to navigate that and to become fully integrated. One heart, one mind. To become a whole person is to become fully individuated and fully integrated heart-mind connection. And there's this acknowledgement that suffering is not an easy path for one to undertake, and that was supported because the goal, for the most part, for most Indigenous peoples, was the development of whole people who could contribute to the ongoing harmony of the community.
Yeah, to take care of one another, to put the community, the family, you know, before the individual, before the self.
Yeah.
It's sort of landing in me more deeply recently, you know, both I feel a deep sense of grief and also a deep sense of wonderment at the beauty of the yearning of people. After the fabric of a culture gets displaced, gets ripped away, so people become undone. And there's incredible suffering right on the other side of residential school systems and all of that. The void, there's a void when those cultural scripts for taking care of one another have been taken away and displaced. There's a void, and now there's all this work mode around taking care of people. It just doesn't seem to be working very well, particularly for Indigenous people.
Well, I'm just thinking as you're sharing, Marla, what you told me about grieving now being added to the DSM, and that grieving, prolonged grieving, is considered to be a mental health disorder. And I only need to think about what my elders have, you know, the terminology that I hear, the way that it is talked about in my own community is our sorrow must have a place. And there are ways that we support people in their sorrow. It's not about running away from it. It's not about getting through it as quickly as possible. It's actually about being able to tolerate it and take up a relationship with it. And that's what we'll be talking about today as well, is how that is part of what needs to happen for healing to unfold.
Where it doesn't alienate us from our community and from our families and from our places of belonging, that are expressions of sadness, of frustration, doesn't get in the way of our relationships. There was so many beautiful, and there are so many beautiful rituals in which this is invited so naturally.
Well, I'm thinking about the story of that song, one of our Squamish songs you hear on the coast here frequently, depending on where you're traveling. It's a very well-known song called the Greeting of the Day song, and it's comes from one of our ancestors by the name of Sequoia. And what I've been told about that song is that it was gifted to a woman who was in deep grief. She had lost her husband, one of the ancestors, and she was in deep grief and she did not want to live any longer. And this song was given to the grieving woman, and she was instructed to wake up before dawn every day and make her way to the river and to sing the sun up with the greeting of the day song each and every day. And that this was her medicine. This was her prescription. This is how her own people, in the context of her own cultural ways of knowing and being, supported her grieving process and ultimately her healing process. I mean, we can contrast that with a mental health model all day and what a doctor, the prescription a doctor would give in response to one's grief. And I just take that story touches my heart every time I'm reminded of it, that it's such powerful understanding.
Yeah. It's such a contrast to our prevailing models of illness, where there's so much focus on illness and treating illness and working hard at illness and suffering. I'm thinking about this beautiful Nufeld elder who I was suffering from a migraine one day and couldn't attend a meeting, and she said her prescription it was to go to the river and put cold water on my face and walk amongst the trees, and it was just such a beautiful prescription. This is how we take care of.
Yeah. Well, and it's the provision of care coming from the elder, giving you, these instructions, leading you into a place where you can find rest.
Yeah. And it is particularly I'm going to say for the nervous system, at least what I experience in myself, is that when there's these natural places where we can just turn to, that we all have access to feel that rest is, there for us, that there is this way of being with nature, with the trees, even pointing to our ancestors of where we are taken care of.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to this slide, which is coming up on the
Yeah.
slide deck soon, about just the continuity that is provided, relationally speaking. This understanding, we're using very intuitive language, and we always do, because this is how we impart understanding to the people that we're supporting. But there is such immense scientific research and evidence that it is the ability to feel our most vulnerable emotions that is at the heart of the healing process. It's in order for nature, and when I say nature, I'm talking about the definition, the original understandings of nature, that there's a life force that grows, that animates all things, that is moving in all things, and that it has an agency of its own, and that this is what is responsible for healing. It's not something that we make happen. It's not something we do. It's something, it's nature's way. But for nature to have its way with us and to take care of us, we must be able to feel the vulnerability of those deep emotions that sometimes when the conditions haven't been right, we are not able to feel. We are not able to express them because emotions can get in the way of our functioning. And so sometimes we lose that ability temporarily.
We do, and I'm going to point to everybody, if you haven't had an opportunity to hear Dr. Neufeld's keynote, dive into that, because he'll really tease apart this difference between feeling and emotions, and how we, suffer further when we lose our capacity to feel our inner emotional world.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about, I think random things in the shower. I have some of my best thinking in the shower and at 3 a.m, of course, when I wake up in the middle of the night, right? But I was just thinking about this, that anything can be either medicine or poison for us. In terms of our recovering the ability to feel emotions, moving our emotions. And that, even substances, I think about alcohol and because addictions is one thing that we see escalating in our communities across Canada. But again, there's this sort of, do we use something in order to be able to feel, or do we use something to escape feeling, to run away from the vulnerable emotions? And that anything can be used for either of those purposes. And so I've had people ask me, well, I go to the river when I'm struggling, I go to the river. Is that a good practice? And I've said, well, I really can't tell you what is a good practice for you. And that's not something that we do. We don't prescribe things to people. That is for you and your elders and your people to determine what are the ways of your people. But if you're going to the river as a way of sitting with and taking up a relationship with the vulnerability that would otherwise be too much to bear, to make room for it to move, for it to be expressed, for the tears to come, for the sadness to be felt, for the missing to be felt, then it's medicine.
Yes. I just heard Denise, I just have to share this with you. I just heard a podcast with, I think it was an American therapist, and she was, she works in this field, particularly in addictions. And she was noticing that she had found this wonderful hobby. And for her, it was reading romance novels. And she told the story about how she became very consumed with this. And she began reading later at night and not being able to get up in the morning, taking her books, even to work with her. And it was fascinating to me to listen to, because it's true. Anything can become something that moves us away from feeling our emotions, anything.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how you pointed us at this way of finding the way of our people, of our culture, of our community, in which healing and feeling is supported.
Well, and every culture uniquely scripts what that will look like. And so there's no way, this is the thing about standardization, and the mental health movement is all about standardization. But when we standardize, we lose the diversity. We lose the local place-based ways of knowing and being.
Yes.
And so for us, it's been so important, this dance, it's been so important to respectfully find a way to center indigenous ways of knowing and being, and allowing the science to inform us around how this can heal, as opposed to sort of trying to figure out what the prescription is. And then we lose this gray area that really is intended to be filled by communities, by families, by certain ways of being, knowing and being, that we find in communities all throughout the country, it will be different. There'll be shared things, but every place is different based on their land base.
Yes, as it should be. It's been so incredible to watch when we get to share this in community with elders, to watch our wise elders just get so excited to, hear what they know, because they know the ways for their people. They carry that wisdom, and to have it be centered when it's been decentered, not held sacred in the center and honored for far too long, displaced.
Yeah, well, what I love what you're saying, because there is a tendency for sort of the big canon of scientific knowledge to eclipse indigenous knowledges and traditions. And so our role is to ensure that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
It's we can benefit from the scientific research that's happening that tells us absolutely, and we need to draw on this. But what we see happening in the work we're doing is that, oh my goodness, that research is acknowledging the power of old cultures to provide the exact relational and emotional context for healing to unfold and for nature to do her work. One of the most important things that we can look for in our young people, in our children, in our youth, in terms of their well-being, in terms of resilience, and Dr. Neufeld talks about this extensively, and this is a very well-researched area. The neurobiology of tears. Do they cry? Is there room for them to cry? Old cultures carried this wisdom about tears since time immemorial. I've heard my elders talk about some of the coastal traditions here, Squamish traditions, in which our longhouse is referred to as the house of transformation or the house of tears. And I've also heard Cree teachings about the sweat lodge, that in the Cree language, it is known as the crying lodge. And these are both places where we go to heal. These are both places where we go to be transformed, and that tears, there's always been a recognition that tears are a symbol of transformation.
Oh, and what a way, when there's a ritual, when this is invited within the places where we already experience togetherness, where we're not going to suffer separation or further disconnection because we have big emotional movement. There's this incredible, generous invitation. It's such a natural way for us to come back to this place of homeostasis, this balance on the other side of this big emotional movement in the natural way.
It's a cycle. And as Indigenous peoples, we think in seasons. Yeah. And that this is a cycle of nature that must happen repeatedly throughout the lifespan. And it certainly must happen often when we're children. And it's absolutely necessary when we're up against something big. The loss of a loved one, some kind of a disappointment, some kind of a deficit that cannot be changed, something that we have to heal from, some kind of a tragedy. We must find our tears. I read Catherine Ashenberg's book, The Mourner's Dance, when I lost my partner almost 5 years ago. And it was a beautiful read. I got so much out of it. I read it just to understand my own grieving process, but it's proven to continue to inform me in terms of my academic and my professional life. But she cites, she looks at the history of grief and mourning rituals. She talks about death rituals and mourning rituals. These were the first ever recorded rituals discovered. And I can see why. I mean, loss and death, it's a universal experience. We must meet with the futility of our mortality at some point, and the mortality of the ones that we love. And so, of course, we would need culturally scripted ways to navigate that. And in her book, she talks about the Maoris and the wailing. And I know that we had wailers as Squamish people, many indigenous traditions. There was this role of criers or wailers that would attend ceremonies or funerals in order to provoke a crying response in the people attending. Yeah. And I love, she says, the Maoris wailed, and the formation of a long stream of mucus from the nose was cultivated as a praiseworthy sign of grief. And so the ugly cry, right, that everyone tries to avoid, that it catches up to us eventually, right? All of us know this place, that this was celebrated. She talks about the more intense the grieving, the greater the possibility for people to recover and to heal. And that the more it was culturally scripted in the traditions, in one's own traditions, the better off the person was going to fare.
It just seems so self-evident, you know, when we begin to unpack it, that of course this is the way that we've always had. We're just embedded, you know, I would say particularly, I can't speak to all other corners of the world, but in North America, and sort of this emotion phobic, doing everything we can to distract ourselves, to move away, to toughen up. And with that, we are much less strong. Our strength comes on the other side of being able to just express in the way we need to for as long as we need to.
Well, and the research shows that when we cry a certain kind of a tear, it's a release of cortisol, which is the stress hormone chemical. And that we need to have a release of this in terms of our neuroplasticity and all the wonderful things that go on inside our brain when we have a good deep cry. This is how we adapt. This is how we make it through things and live to tell the tale another day. And carry on with a soft heart. And we don't, this is really the birthplace, the center of our what makes us uniquely human.
Yeah, it was one of my biggest concerns. Really, what led me to Dr. Neufeld's work is I spent many years working in the school system with adolescents and seeing adolescents absolutely rocked by their emotions because we're so disconnected from our cultural scripts of what to do with our feelings when we're feeling them. And so this incredible alarm that would just take over an adolescent's world when they were having big emotions was so heart-wrenching to bear witness to.
Yes. I think, Marla, that is probably a good note for us to end our talk on today. I want to end with this beautiful quote out of Catherine Ashenberg's book. She says, "The truth seems to be that as long as culture supports the individual mourner in its particular traditions, whatever they are, the result is more likely to be good than bad."
Beautiful, beautiful quote to end on.
Just coming back in. Just unmute yourself, Dr. Ruth. Just lovely to hear from those two. And now I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Ruth.
Oh, Tanakwe, Adrienne, thank you. Well, it was such a profound presentation by Denise and Marla, and really impressed by how much they helped us see that living soft-heartedly is the real way to living wholeheartedly, being able to access our tears regularly over our regular disappointments, because life is suffering. And, that's part of life, is glorious and messy and painful. And so for us to go back into that place where Neufeld continually says right relationships and soft hearts need to go hand in hand, because tears, vulnerable feelings, especially vulnerable tears, need to be safe, have a safe container. And as you mentioned earlier, Adie, that whole sense of the relationship being the container to hold the messy emotions that first might come out with our children, which is maybe rage and the more mad before it softens to sad. The the frustration that comes out maybe more as aggression first before it turns the corner into sadness, good, healthy weeping over things we cannot change, all the things we feel powerless about. And yet to be empowered once we've come the other side of tears, because they've transformed us and they've led to resilience. So I was just, very grateful for their deep indigenous wisdom, because it does seem to resonate with a lot of our intuitive knowledge around after a good cry. Most of us can probably say, oh, that felt so good. And then we're back to psychological rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ruth. Well, it's time now for any of you who have questions to bring them up. And what I'm going to do is end the recording. So feel free to bring your faces up and ask a question live if you like. Let me bring that down. Those of us who joined us just afterwards on screen, thank you for coming. Lovely to have you with us.